We will now present to the Honorable Kathleen Theoharides the Chancellor's Medal for Distinguished Service. Our university bestows this honor upon individuals whose accomplishments embody the values our institution holds dear. A leader in the Commonwealth's efforts to mitigate the effects of climate change, Kathleen A. Theoharides, Class of 2007, Secretary of the Executive Office of Energy and Environmental Affairs, the University of Massachusetts, Boston, recognizes you and celebrates your achievements. You joined the Baker-Polito administration as Director for Climate and Global Warming Solutions in the Executive Office of Energy and Environmental Affairs in 2016. In that role, you guided the development and implementation of the administration's efforts to safeguard Massachusetts from the impacts of climate change and coordinated efforts across state government to reduce emissions. You worked to implement Executive Order 569 and led the development of the State Hazard Mitigation and Climate Adaptation Plan. You also created the Municipal Vulnerability Preparedness Program, growing it to reach 50% of cities and towns in the Commonwealth in less than 3 years. You were promoted to Secretary in 2019 and continued to lead the Commonwealth's effort on climate change. You worked to strengthen regional and national coalitions, focus on bipartisan state climate leadership, such as the United States Climate Alliance and the Transportation Climate Initiative. Today, you oversee the Commonwealth's 6 environmental, natural resource, and energy regulatory agencies. You also serve as chair of the Massachusetts Water Resources Authority, the Energy Facility Sitting Board, and the Massachusetts Clean Energy Center. You earned a Master's of Science in Ecology and Environmental Biology from the University of Massachusetts, Boston in 2007, and have used your training and knowledge on behalf of science-based environmental public policy for the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. That all may know of your leadership in environmental public policy and in preparing municipalities to combat the effects of climate change, the University of Massachusetts, Boston is honored to confer upon you, Kathleen A. Theoharides, the Chancellor's Medal for Distinguished Service. Now, with our 2021 Commencement Address, please welcome Secretary Kathleen Theoharides.
Thank you, Chancellor Suarez Orozco. It is a great honor to receive this award, not only as a proud member of the graduate school class of 2007 from UMass Boston, but because your list of past award recipients includes so many people I admire. And it's particularly meaningful coming from UMass Boston, an institution that is integral to the fabric of the city and the Commonwealth, and one that is focused on lifelong learning, on solving challenging problems, and on service. This school helped shape the trajectory of my career by showing me the role science can play in informing good policy and management decisions, and inspiring me to use science for service. To the graduates of the class of 2021, your parents and family, your loved ones and friends, your teachers and supporters, my hearty congratulations. There are so many people proud of you today, and so many people who have watched and cheered and kept you strong along the way. I'm sure they've also given the occasional yell to get the heck out of bed and do your homework, but I know you are grateful for them, and we are also grateful you are here. for your resilience and the sheer force of will that brought you through. You are our newest problem solvers, our newest vaccine developers, our newest teachers and authors, politicians and athletes, community leaders and environmental champions, healthcare workers and counselors, scientists and artists. And as the sun breaks through the clouds after this very dark year, I can't help but reflect on your graduation and the graduation of your peers around the country and the world this spring as a down payment on hope. As we've moved through this difficult pandemic, it was always clear that science was our best hope to get us out of this mess. The science of disease transmission and the rapid work to understand COVID-19 and how it spread, the use of science by health professionals around the world to treat patients, and the rules set by state and local government leaders to keep us all safe. And of course, the rapid development of multiple life-saving vaccines. But, and I say this as a scientist, at the end of the day, it won't be science alone that brings us back from this pandemic or helps us rebuild. Science will give us answers and solutions, and yes, even hope. But it will be people in every line of work pulling together to get through the final stages of this pandemic and then digging in and finding the strength to create a new and more resilient future. My own work and passion is environmental conservation and solving climate change. From historic coastal flooding and erosion to droughts and massive wildfires to food shortages and pandemics, the impacts of climate change threaten the way we live, our communities and businesses, our children's future, and the other creatures who call this planet home. By the end of this century, we may experience here in Boston upwards of 90 days above 90 degrees. At the same time, sea level rise as a result of melting glaciers and warming waters could be as high as 7 to 10 feet in the Boston area. And by the way, this is data that was produced for the city of Boston by a group led by UMB. Over the last year, I've thought a lot about the parallels between the pandemic and our climate emergency. COVID-19 has threatened our health and way of life, but climate change presents a still greater long-term threat, and one for which there is no vaccine. And at a time when thinking beyond the current week sometimes seems like a gamble, we all need to set our eyes firmly on the future. When everyone is vaccinated and can return to work and school and parties and life, how do we want to go back? How do we want to show up for each other and the planet? Can we rebuild in a way that fights climate change, supports marginalized communities, and protects other species? I think we can, but we'll need to pause, to be deliberate, and to do some of the visioning and planning that we sometimes don't stop to think about. At the state level, we recently completed a deep decarbonization roadmap to get to net zero emissions by 2050, a transformational target that is consistent with where the science says we need to go to avoid the worst impacts of climate change. At the same time, the Baker administration is planning for how this pandemic will inexorably change the way we live and work. We've seen promising harbingers of change. The ability to telecommute may help us reduce emissions from transportation long term. The connections made during the pandemic between air quality, climate change, and respiratory illness in low-income and minority communities is helping to shine a light on the urgency of equitably reducing emissions. Perhaps most importantly, we've seen the potential for a global society at every level to act in a coordinated way, listening to the science for the good of our communities and each other. This sense of collective duty is what it will take to navigate the challenges of climate change. The science is here, the technology exists, and while there will certainly be more innovations and breakthroughs to help us get there, what is needed most is that shared urgency, that willingness to work together and to listen to each other. I hope all of you will consider what role you can play in taking on this challenge to rebuild our world and to lead us through what may be some of the most transformative years ahead. I've got plenty of learning to do myself, so I often hesitate to give advice, but I'd like to share a few things that have helped me in my career. First, some of the learning you are leaving with today had nothing to do with your particular degree. It might have been that yes, you can survive Boston's crazy roadways and stay cool under pressure. That presenting on a Zoom goes much better if you pretend you are going to work and get fully dressed. Showing up prepared mentally matters. Or that no, You should never sleep overnight in the science lab in the McCormick building. It's infested with mice who come out of the walls as it gets dark. Not a great sleeping situation. Second, do not let your degree, those initials on paper, limit you. The skills you gained while acquiring knowledge are in many ways more important than the knowledge itself. Don't be afraid to branch out and try new things. Ecologists can be policymakers, poets can be community leaders. It's okay to make a mess and clean it up. Sometimes getting to a solution is messy. Not trying is very neat and tidy, but it has no potential for positive outcome. Use science and data. Curiosity can help you solve problems and find answers, and a well-honed scientific method of inquiry is a beautiful way to problem solve. But sometimes hard decisions require more than that. At those times, you'll have to listen to people you trust and rely on your gut. Finally, listening, really listening and hearing, is what sets apart the most effective, compassionate leaders. I encourage you all to listen and to not be afraid to continue to take on the hardest fights, because it's likely they will be the most worthwhile things you'll ever do in your career. Congratulations, Godspeed, and thank you again for the tremendous honor. Thank you to all of the graduates everywhere for giving us hope this spring. And of course, go Beacons.